Did you ever talk to KRS-One about how he changed your life?
Dude, can I tell you a funny story? I worship KRS-One. You know, like hearing Beef obviously was like this catalyst for me becoming a food justice activist. And when I say becoming a food justice activist, I mean being the most self-righteous, dogmatic, judgmental vegan that you could ever imagine in high school.
Tell them.
But
First, that story, right? If they don't know, right? You heard KRS-One's song Beef and decided to become a vegan.
So my boy brings over this tape because, you know, we listened to tapes back in the 90s. And I hear Beef. What a relief. When will this poisonous cease? This is another public service announcement. You can believe it or you can doubt it. And that just changed everything for me.
The Toure Show. Okay, though. The Toure Show. Okay, though.
That might be the best question I've ever been asked.
You're a phenomenal person. I mean, you legendary.
I am a fan of you, my brother.
Bryant Terry is one of the great names in American cooking today. He is a food justice activist. He's the author of an epic book called Black Food that looks at the entirety of what Black food is all about. And it is a gorgeous book. It has a deep affection for Black people, for food justice, for feeding Black America in a beneficial way. Let's get into it. It's my man, Bryant Terry. James Beard Award winning on Touré Show. There's a certain audacity that I appreciate in somebody who says, I'm going to make a cookbook called Black Food. It's a very aggressive, confident gesture. Like, I am going to break down and codify the whole thing. This is it. This is the only Black cookbook you'll ever need. I'm like, wow, like we really threw down and got like when you said, let's name it Black Food, did something and you go, wow, am I ready? Am I ready for this level of gauntlet? Like, the resume is crazy, but even still, like, wow, I really just threw it down there.
You know what gave me courage to even go with that title? Toni Morrison put together an anthology in the 70s called The Black Book. And I remember being in college, and it was almost as if that book kind of fell off of a shelf and just called me. And so I thought it was so brilliant in that it brought together, essays and, archival photos and song lyrics and ephemera and all these things to tell this complex story of who we are as a people. And so when I thought about the story that I wanted to tell about who we are as a people through the lens of food, I felt like it was so appropriate to title it Black Food. But the other thing is, my literary agent and I made the decision to pitch this book to my publisher in 2020, right as everything was exploding in this country, after the state murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd. And so we were in this radical movement moment. And I just felt like, what other title, definitely drawing on the energy of the Black Power movement, definitely drawing on this radical energy that was brewing in that moment. And so I didn't want to tiptoe. I wanted to just put it right in our face. Black Food. This is a book, it's FUBU, for us, by us, and we're inviting the world in. And here we are.
There's a bunch of different points that you are referencing in the book that I want to jump off of. And maybe we go backwards a little bit. Toward the end, you start talking about the future of Black cuisine. What do you see as the future, as the next steps?
What I see as the future of Black cuisine is Black people divesting from the industrialized food system that is mostly concerned with profits. We know that there is this illusion of choice. There was a recent study that found that 80% of the food items that we find in conventional supermarkets are owned by a handful of multinational food corporations. I think about this quote that Malcolm X said, where he talks about when you go shopping in a store in which the owner of that store lives in a different community, at the end of the day, that shop owner takes that money back to his community. And so when I think about this idea of self-sufficiency, self-determination, us being in power of our communities and controlling our communities. I think it's important that we start to own the means of production. I think it's important that we're supporting local artisans and local farmers, getting back to the ways that we had to rely on before our food system was industrialized. So for me, it's really about just knowing that we have to be owning and driving the solutions to the problems in our communities, whether it's the exponential rise in preventable diet-related illnesses like cancer and type 2 diabetes, and other diseases, or it's just like the reality that we're putting so much money in Walmart and Whole Foods and all these corporations. We need to be putting in money so that it continues to recirculate in our community, and we are empowering our communities and not people outside of our communities.
I wonder also, because you're a chef, what the different plate you think will look like going forward. Because in our lives, we've seen this massive shift, right? I think soul food, when we were young, right, was great, had a lot of salt, had a lot of fried stuff, right? Tons of protein, what have you. And in our lifetime, we've seen this pushback, largely led by millennials, who are saying, hey, mom, grandmom, like, I love the soul food, but it's not good for us in different ways in terms of cholesterol, heart, fried, these sort of things. So can we get soul food that is healthier? And a lot of people have gone along with that, and they're trying to make it a different way. So I wonder if you see other food trends that indicate where you think what the plate might look like in 20 years.
I talk about this in Black food, and my work has been largely driven by this West African concept, Sankofa, which is symbolized by a bird that's walking forward while looking back with its head pointed backwards. And it's, really a way to think about how we can progress, but also carrying with us the best traditions, the best practices, the traditions, the things that helped our ancestors survive and thrive. And so for me, when I think about like what is the future of Black food, it's about getting back to the ways in which our grandparents ate. I hear that term soul food, and the problem with that term for me is that it reduces our cuisine. Because when people hear soul food, they think, that's what Black people eat. Like if Black people just stop eating soul food, then they could prevent all these diet-related illnesses. And what I found is people are thinking of one of two things: either the antebellum survival foods that many enslaved Africans had to rely upon. The problem with that reductive framing is that it paints the institution of slavery as a monolith. I mean, first of all, let's just be clear. Every person of African descent on this landmass wasn't enslaved. There were, as you know, Touré, free Blacks. And so the idea that, soul food is just slave food, which I often hear, not just the wider culture, but even Black folks pejoratively kind of talking about our cuisine, like that's slave food. We don't need to eat that. The other way that people reduce soul food is by kind of thinking about it or imagining it as the big flavored meats or the overcooked vegetables or sugary desserts that you find in a soul food restaurant. When I think about my family who had, farms in rural Mississippi and Tennessee and Arkansas, my grandparents who migrated from the rural South to Memphis and, had kitchen gardens and urban farms, the type of food that they were eating. I mean, look, if we talk about things like what my grandparents were growing and everybody in their community, all these elder Black folks, collards, mustards, turnips, kale, dandelions, sugar snap peas, pole beans, black eyed peas, sweet potatoes, butternut squash. That was their soul food. These are the type of foods that any Western trained allopathic physician or dietitian or nutritionist would say we should all be eating. So I don't want to like have people rejecting the pig's feet and neck bones and saying that that's not a part of our cuisine, because it is. And so is red velvet cake and mac and cheese. But I think all those diverse, healthful foods are a part of our cuisine as well. So we need to recognize and embrace that and not just reduce it to its worst parts.
What is your favorite thing to cook? Like if I said, I'm coming to Oakland, I'm coming to the crib, Bryant. What you gotta make me something crazy that really shows me who you are. What would you make?
I would probably make, let me just say, before I even think about a specific dish, I would make a dish that my wife and I talk about as Afro-Asian. one of the things that was important to us in raising our daughters and really helping them embrace their complex identities as children who have a Chinese American mom and an African American dad from the South. We really wanted them to know themselves through the foods that they ate, and the foods that we grow in our garden and the foods that we, cultivate. And so, I would probably make, there's this traditional Chinese dish called zhong, which is this kind of rice dish that you wrap in um, um, bamboo and then you steam it. And sometimes you have like chestnuts and fatty pork. And for our wedding, we decided to flip it and give it this kind of like Afro Asian twist. So we had, rice, but then we added black eyed peas and we added peanuts. And that was really a symbol of our union and just how we're trying to really just cultivate, this idea that we're all the same. There is no separation if we think about it in the kind of Buddhist sense. So I make you that, Touré.
That sounds beautiful. You're a bigger man than me because I love how you are embracing children. You are both African American and Chinese American. It's both because my wife is Middle Eastern, and I'll be like, "Yeah, kids, you're black." Honey, I filled out the census, and and I already sent it, and I checked black. Sorry, there was no box for Middle East. I'd be fucking with her, but also like, y'all, you're black, right? Like. And she'll, she'll give her. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, because of the way that they present, we know the one drop rule that's pervasive in this country. Yeah. And our girls, like phenotypically, they look like they're mixed with something. A lot of people actually think they're South Asian before they actually, hear about their background. But because they're because a lot of people would automatically pigeonhole them as black, we really want them to embrace their identity as Chinese so they can be like, no, you're not going to just tell me who I am. So we sent them to dual immersion, language immersion preschool. So they were, fluent in Chinese and they're like steeped in their Chinese culture and they spend a lot of time with my in-laws. So I think it's important that we don't let the world dictate who they are. And this idea that you're half Chinese and half, black. I'm like, no, you're whole black, you whole Chinese, you ain't half nothing. You're a whole person. And, we reflect that in our politics and the way that we feed them. And they have a real strong sense of self-esteem because of that. I think people who try to shy away from that and don't really encourage their children to embrace their fullness, that's when they can get mixed up in the world. And I'm like, we don't need mixed kids who are mixed up in the world.
Right. There's always going to be that struggle, right? Because the black kids are going to be like, well, you're not really black, right? In high school and college level. And the other kids are like, well, you're not really one of us. And a lot of, I don't know how it's going to be for my kids because I know my son looks black at a distance, right? So people will assume he's black and then get to know him and like, oh, you're half Middle Eastern. Okay. My daughter will I assume a lot of people, she'll be one of the people be like, where are you from? Are you Latino? Are you black? Are you mixed? We're not sure what's going on here. She may run into a lot of those issues of like, we are not sure where to place you because you look mixed. So we're not, one of the chapters of your book is Black queer food. How is food queer or straight?
That's a great question. And let me just say that when I was including that chapter in the book, I was very clear that it was going to put a lot of black folks off. Probably a lot of people in my family. And I just couldn't even worry about that. I needed to write this book from the most honest and authentic perspective as I could. And so to take a step back, for the past 7 years, I've had this position at MOAD, the Museum of the African Diaspora. Yes. There's MOCADA in Brooklyn. In San Francisco, we got MOAD. So the Museum of the African Diaspora, I was invited by the former executive director to co-create this programming, which was about how can we use this fine art museum to talk about issues beyond just contemporary art. And so I've been programming around issues related to health and food and farming. So literally several of the chapters in Black food the name of them and the spirit are taken from programs that I did at the museum. So I had a program a few years ago called Black Queer Food, because there are a lot of my colleagues and friends who are in the food space, whether chefs or restaurateurs or cookbook authors or journalists, who are, genderqueer, gender nonconforming, queer. And I just wanted to create space for them to talk about this intersection, because we talk about it in private, just the way in which they experience, racism and homophobia. And I wanted them to be able to, come together and talk about these things. And it was such a powerful and moving program. And so when we were putting the book together, I knew that we needed to have a chapter that gave voice to my LGBTQIA colleagues and friends. And in many ways, that chapter for me, I'm most proud of that chapter. I feel like it's the most important chapter in our book, because I've always had this perspective that if we are to work towards liberation, we have to work towards the most marginalized people in our community. So if we're thinking about that, we need to be thinking about Black trans women. Like, if we can help, that population move towards liberation, then everybody wins. But it's a dishonest conversation if we're talking about Black liberation if we aren't including and making room at the table for our queer brothers and sisters. So that was very important for me.
I mean, I'm with all of that, 100%, right? And welcome them in, but I'm still not clear. You gave me a plate of chicken and rice and whatever. I mean, if you said like, when you enter the restaurant space, then okay, now I understand. Now I understand, right? But like, my gay friends come over, or I go to their house, they make me a plate of chicken. How is that plate queer or straight or non-binary? Or, I mean, are these folks eating differently or seasoning differently that I'm not aware of? Like, help me out.
No, man, they just like, they're human beings. So it's less about the food itself, but more about the people who are growing it and cooking it and eating it and recognizing their brilliance and their agency, and understanding that, we need, as I mentioned in the beginning of the book, we need to dig deep and weed and rake any attitudes that reject any of us in our community. I mean, look, as well as I do, that so many of these Black liberation movements, it was like queer folks who've been some of the most important leaders, whether we're talking about the brilliance of James Baldwin and the way in which he's been so forthright and kind of like critiquing America and, capitalism and white supremacy, or Bayard Rustin, who was the architect of the March on Washington. So I'm like, let's get over ourselves. Like, folks want to be homophobic as hell, but know that preacher and the choir director up there, they know exactly what's going on. So I'm like, if we're going to like be about it, let's be about it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Celebrate the 100th birthday of James Baldwin, the literary legend and civil rights activist who is right here on my ring. Go Tell It on the Mountain is his powerful coming-of-age novel that's unforgettable. It's Baldwin's first major work, and it's an amazing story about a boy who's very much like Baldwin, a teen in the 1930s in Harlem who's working out his sexuality amid the backdrop of a conservative Pentecostal church. Baldwin is one of the great writers of the century, and this novel was the first time everyone knew it. Pick up the new deluxe edition featuring an introduction by the great Roxane Gay, author of Bad Feminist and more. I love getting lost in James Baldwin's sentences. Pick up Go Tell It on the Mountain.
So you worked closely with Alice Waters, who is one of the great names of American cooking. What did you learn from Alice Waters?
Alice has been one of my most important mentors. In 2009, when my book, Vegan Soul Kitchen, was published, we were still at a moment. I mean, look, I think a lot of people, we're at a moment historically where veganism isn't so on the margins. It isn't seen as like the kind of hippie Berkeley 1970s. You have like Pinky Cole with her empire blowing up. What is it, the Slutty Vegan? By the way, I heard there's a Slutty Vegan in Brooklyn now. Is that real?
Yo, it's right next to a Biggie mural. It's like a 4-minute walk from my house.
Oh, the joint over in
Fridays. Yeah. Friday, Saturday nights, there is a very long line outside of that place. People are clearly waiting 45 to 50 minutes to get their food and in Fort Greene, forget about it. They're happy to wait for the slutty vegan to support her to get that food. So, that movement is finding love.
That's amazing. I mean, look, the reality is in 2009, when I first started my career in publishing, people still would side-eye vegan stuff. They'd be like, I don't know about that. Some brown rice with some tofu with some brown sauce over it. To have Alice Waters write a blurb on the front of that book was monumental because it really took it from this kind of like marginal place where it's like, yeah, that's what like those weirdos do, and made it something that a lot of people paid attention to. But I would say the most important lesson I learned from Alice is that one can use the sensual pleasures of the table to affect change. I think a lot of people like to start with the food politics, and that's fine. Like, I think in order for us to have like a revolution in the food space, we need to have a robust grassroots movement. But oftentimes, when you start with the politics, you turn a lot of people away. And I find that when you start with food, like literally feeding people, I mean, everybody loves to eat good food. And so that's such a powerful way to bring people to the table. And then people are much more open to thinking about how they can be involved in their communities and how they can be involved as citizens to change policies that prevent people from eating and accessing healthy, fresh food. So, I love what Alice has done with Chez Panisse, and she's like the godmother of this food revolution in so many ways. And I think that one simple thing of like, I'm going to invite you to the table, and that's how I'm going to get you to think about how you can be active in the food movement, is what she taught me.
That's what you're touching on. One of the things that I get into in my house a lot, because my wife, in terms of being the mom who wants to make sure the kids are fed or whatever, are talking to them about, are you hungry? How hungry are you? If you say you're hungry, then I'm going to feed you. If you say you're very hungry, I'll feed you more or less or whatever. And I'm like, and I'm fighting a losing battle because the kids are on the same planet. I'm not hungry. I'm like, we don't wait until we're hungry to eat. We eat at certain times, which allows the body to stay full rather than let the body empty and then you fill it up in an emergency situation. But also, if you're not hungry, you can better enjoy the food. Because again, your body's not emergency, feed me, right? If you're that state, you can't really enjoy the food because I got to finish this being hungry because it's uncomfortable being hungry. I'm like, let's eat. Let's not wait till we're hungry. It's 12 o'clock. Like, dude, we eat now.
You better than me. I feel like I've lost that battle. Like in the morning times, I'm just like, dude, like you need fuel to start your day. You're going to learn. You need to have food so that you can be adequately, assimilating the information you're learning at school. And they just don't want to eat. So I'm just like, whatever. I'm not going to be some patriarch and make you eat, but I'm not with that. So anyway.
Tell me, let's get back to the joy of cooking for you. What do you love about cooking?
To be honest with you, and I've been very private about this, and I'm just now starting to be a little more public about this kind of evolution of my work. I'm exhausted of cooking. I'm largely trying to shed these identities that I've held for over 2 decades now as chef, food justice activist. I need something new, and I've had that thing for the past several months. So I've been on. I'm actually in my art studio on UC Berkeley's campus because this academic year I've been a fellow between the Black Studies and Art Practice departments at UC Berkeley, and I was invited by Lee Rayford, this Black scholar, to be a part of this Black Studies collaboratory. And it was just what I was needed because I was feeling so burnt out with writing cookbooks and, hosting dinners and all these things that I've been doing. And I wanted to express myself in a different way, not abandoning the body of work that I've built over the past 2 decades, but really reimagining it through the lens of contemporary art. And I can't tell you, Touré, how invigorated I just feel like so alive. I feel like so many more neural pathways are being formed. Being in the studio, making art that is asking many of the questions that I've been asking over the past 2 decades, addressing many of the issues that have been important to me, has been one of the most important things that I could have done for my career and myself. So I'm kind of tired of cooking, but I'm not tired of food. I just want to think about and kind of connect with food in different ways than I have over the past 2 decades.
It's a kind of a big thing that because it's been an extraordinary career, James Beard Awards and all these sort of accolades and an incredibly important space in the food world, and yet you're like tired of cooking.
Yeah. I don't think I think we all need to continue to reinvent ourselves. We all need to put ourselves in position where we're learning, as a brilliant journalist and someone who's just a rigorous writer as well as a reader. It's important for us to continue to put ourselves be in a place of discomfort because that's when we grow. And so
Mm.
this position that I'm in now, where I'm in the contemporary art world, it's a little uncomfortable because I'm learning a lot. I mean, it's similar with my publishing and print. I don't know if you know that Black Food is the first book on my publishing and print, Four Color Books, which is an imprint of
Mhm.
Penguin Random House. I don't know how to be a publisher. I'm great at being an author. I'm 6 books in, but I'm figuring it out. And with both of those things, I just feel like I'm in this place of discomfort, but I'm growing immensely. And I think that's going to allow me to have fresh eyes when I decide to get back to cooking more consistently and just have a passion and love for it because I don't want to be doing anything in a rote manner just because I have to. I want to feel like that excitement and that love and passion for it. And honestly, I just haven't been feeling that for cooking or to a certain extent even writing books. Black Food need to be written. Like we had to write that book. It needed to come out in that moment, but we put it together in 9 months. Typically, books come together in 2 years. It was exhausting. I say that that's my last cookbook. So it feels good to be in a place where I'm actually excited about anything again. And I think that I'll make my way back to being excited about like being in the kitchen and making foods and who knows, maybe even writing another cookbook.
Was there a moment when you said, no, I need something new? Or was it a slow build?
All right, I'm gonna get real with you. There was a moment. So last year, so because of COVID, the James Beard Awards um, didn't have a ceremony in 2020. And so in 2022, no, they didn't have a ceremony in 2020. So in 2022, what they decided, because they were coming back, we're having a big award ceremony in Chicago. So they decided to take all the books from 2021 and 2020 and lump them together. And then whatever came out to the top as the best books, those would be the ones in contention for awards. So I had a book that came out before Black Food called Vegetable Kingdom, which came out in 2020. And so I had the unprecedented honor of having 2 books up for awards at the James Beard Media Awards in the same year. So that was a big deal. Now, get to the award ceremony. I bring my whole team. My wife is there. And Vegetable Kingdom comes up, loses. Black Food comes up, loses to a book that came out the year before. And you could hear a pin drop in the room because I think everybody was like, wait, what? Black Food didn't win? I mean, it was literally the most critically acclaimed cookbook to come out in 2021. We won all the awards, all the accolades, New Yorker, Boston Globe. Just everybody loved it. And so people were confused. Look, I haven't said this publicly, but I'm going to tell you, it broke my heart. I was sad. I was embarrassed. I just didn't know what to do with it. And so it just really forced me to do a lot of introspection about what I wanted my creative life to look like in the coming decades. And I realized that I don't want to put everything on writing cookbooks. I don't want to put everything on, being a chef. I want to think about creative ways that I can express myself differently. So that was the catalyst, that moment. Not that I hadn't been feeling like, what else is out there for me? But that disappointment, that heartbreak of that night, it forced me to step back and it was the best thing that could have happened to me. Napoleon Hill, who wrote Think and Grow Rich, he always talks about how with every disappointment, there's a seed of an equivalent benefit. We just need to see it. Like, we may not be able to understand in a minute, but if we can understand that many of the things that are disappointments or setbacks, they're actually for our highest good. I now recognize that that night, that disappointment I felt was for my highest good, because it just put me on this whole new trajectory, helped me evolve all the ways that I'm doing my work. And I just got word yesterday that I will be one of 6 members in the incoming class of the MFA in Art Practice program at UC Berkeley. So I'll be spending 2 years in the studio, learning, growing, and I'm just excited for what's to come.
Wow. Wow. Thank you for that story. I mean, you're dealing there with something that a lot of us have dealt with in terms of you're doing heroic work within the Black food space and articulating what Black food is about. And FUBU speaking to us about our food and doing so it's a gorgeous book. It's a definitive book. It is a progressive book and a historical. I mean, like it lives up to the title, the epic title. And when you ask white people to put it into context, and clearly many other white people got the immensity of the project, and these white people did not. And I mean, like when we need white people for validation, when we're doing work within Black aesthetics, you're gonna get disappointed.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen that across the board. We see it in the film and television world, where so often such brilliant and provocative work isn't recognized by these mainstream institutions. And I think just in general, we have to move past wanting this validation from white folks, from white institutions, and just building our own institution. So, I mean, look, I'm not going to pretend like having James Beard Award-winning chef it's been great for my career. Like, people see that and they're like, oh, okay, this Negro real. Let's open up the door for him. But, I think it's important that we recognize that we're all we need. We don't need these institutions to say, the catalyst, when I was reaching out to the more than 100 contributors to Black food, the quote that I shared with them is one by Toni Morrison, in which she talks about racism being a distraction, and how when we're so consumed with the albatross of white supremacy, it just prevents us from being fully human and, just living. And so this idea of FUBU was real to me. I was like, listen, I want whatever contribution to your book, whether it's a recipe, whether it's a poem, whether it's a work of art, I want it written without any concern for the white gaze. And I want it to be something a conversation that we're having among each other, and we invite the world in. And so in many ways, you're right. Just this idea that like, oh, they didn't recognize it. Who cares? The people love it. I mean, I get messages every week from regular everyday people who are just like, thank you. Thank you. This book reminds me of growing up in a community where Black people were growing food. It reminds me of the pickles and preserves that my grandmother had. It reminds me of the farms that our families own in the rural South. And so that's the most important thing to me. And we won.
That Toni Morrison quote, that Toni Morrison quote you talked about, that was in your letter, your request letter. I shared that on Twitter today because it was so powerful. And you're talking about how microaggressions, macroaggressions, white supremacy, all of that takes up psychic space and time in our minds. And even if something specific doesn't happen in a given moment, we're still thinking about, aware of, it occupies space in our mind. It goes to the concept of stereotype threat, that we know the stereotypes about us and we strive to not fall into them.
Yep.
But where Johnny is just doing the math test and doing the best he can, Kwame is doing it knowing if I do badly, they'll think it's because I'm Black, and they'll think, here, continues, all Black people are dumb, or they're not intellectually superior like we are. Mm-hmm. He's got Blackness on his shoulders, and that diminishes his potential, because he's just, even if it's 1% of your mind or your being that's in there. And we see some of that we're talking about in what you experienced in your life there.
It's exhausting, and as you mentioned, it's not about whether that moment was racist or not. Sometimes you don't know. You don't know people's intentions. They could just be an asshole. And then, they may not be racist or whatever. But the fact that I have some incident, some interaction, and then I'm spending an hour just ruminating, like, was that some racism?
Wondering
right. So it's exhausting, but the thing that I've been excited about, because I often talk about when we think about change to our food system, because we're in a moment where it's like having started this work as a food justice activist when I was living in Brooklyn 20 years ago. I have to say it's very exciting to see that more people are going to the farmers market. I remember when the Fort Greene farmers market popped up, and I was like, this is dope. Like, there's a place where we can go. We don't have to go to Grand Army Plaza. It's like right down the street, because I lived on St. James Place in Fulton, where Biggie grew up.
Yeah.
But having that farmers market, or having people have more an awareness around, like, yes, I want to shop in alignment with my values. I want to go and spend my money at the farmers market, or buy fair trade, or support local artisans. I think that's important. But what's been frustrating is that a lot of people stop there. It's almost as if consumer action, we can buy ourselves our way out of this problem. So I always tell people we have to spend in alignment with our values, but we have to move beyond that and think about how can we be community members? How can we support grassroots organizations who are doing the food justice work, who are working with young people, who are trying to create urban farms and urban gardens? And then the reality is so many of these issues are structural. There's so many physical and economic and geographic barriers that a lot of low-income people across the board, but specifically Black people, have to accessing healthy, fresh, affordable food, that we have to see ourselves as active citizens in changing these public policies on the local, on the state and federal level, to create a food system that's equitable for everyone. But the thing that's been so exciting to me is that a lot of Black people, especially younger Black people, are recognizing that these institutions that we've tried to believe in, we've tried to have hope in, they're just not going to serve us. We've seen this over the past 2 years with the immense kind of widening in the wage gap, with the inept response of the U.S. government to the COVID crisis. And a lot of people are just like, you know what? My grandfather's farm in North Carolina, yeah, I went to, some Ivy League school or some well-regarded elite liberal arts school on the East Coast, but I'm going back to the South. I'm going to take over my family's farm. I'm going to, sure, I worked on Wall Street, but I'm going to do this grassroots community work, because we need to make sure that not just people with a lot of resources can eat healthfully. So I love this spirit that I'm seeing, almost in the same spirit of the Black Panthers in the 60s, where it's just clear that we all we have. Look, I'm trying to be all proud. We all we have. We all we got. Right. So if we're not taking care of that, we all we got, my brother. And so it's exciting, just this whole trend towards folks just look, let's take care of each other. And I think that is how we're going to win. The Black Panthers are the reason that I started doing food justice activism back in 2001. And I continue to uplift them, because I think that we have to embrace the spirit of the Free Breakfast for Children program and the grocery giveaways and all the amazing work that they did in Oakland and beyond to take care of our people.
Yes, the history books want to talk about, going into the legislature with guns and trials and these sorts of things and shootouts. But these are people who were feeding the children of the Bay Area a free breakfast every morning when the school wasn't doing it. A lot of times the home wasn't or couldn't do it. They understood the importance of that. And that is really beautiful. I do want to talk about food justice a little bit, because it's so critical. And I don't think it fully came home to me, because I lived in Brooklyn ever since I got in Fort Greene and Park Slope ever since I got out of college, right? So these are areas, middle class areas, where a lot of food is available most of the day, right? So I never had to struggle with where am I going to get X, Y, and Z. But then I was covering the Freddie Gray uprising. So we're in Baltimore for a week, right? And we kept going to the same little tiny, they wouldn't call it a bodega, but like a deli.
Mhm.
And my white producer's there with me, and she's like, oh, grab me a banana. And I'd been going in there. I'm like, there's no bananas in here. And she's like, what do you mean there's no bananas in there? Well, get me an apple. I'm like, there's no apples in here. And she's like, what are you talking about? And this sister was passing by in the store, and I just stopped her and I'm like, yo, if you wanted to get a banana, where, like a bunch of it, like where would you go? And she's like, well, if you take the bus and transfer and then you could get to the Whole Foods or the Piggly Wiggly or whatever, and you get it there. So you got to take 2 buses to get to a decent grocery. Yeah. Like, and that's a food desert, right? And actually somebody on TikTok said, stop calling it a food desert, because that makes it seem like a natural occurrence, right? A desert is a natural occurrence, right? These are not naturally occurring things. This is planned obsolescence. This is part of segregation. I forget what term he said to replace it with.
Food apartheid.
But he was like, stop.
Food apartheid.
I mean, come on.
My mentor,
So
Karen Washington, who is one of the godmothers of the food justice movement in New York City, she really encourages us to use the term food apartheid in lieu of food desert, as you mentioned, because it puts squarely in our face the physical, the economic, the geographic barriers that prevent so many people from accessing healthy, fresh, affordable, and culturally appropriate food. And, the thing about food justice is that, I talk about the Black Panthers a lot. And let me just say this. I know colloquially we talk about the Black Panthers, but their name when they were founded was the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense. Why? Because they were founded to address police violence in our communities. You had cops coming into Black communities in Oakland and violating the rights of citizens, and in many cases, killing Black folks. So this issue of police violence has been persistent. I mean, like, we can even go beyond. We can go back hundreds of years if you want to expand our understanding of what the police are. But I love that they understood that, that's just one issue that Black folks are dealing with. Black folks are dealing with medical apartheid. That's why they started the sickle cell anemia testing, because so much of the medical research wasn't looking at diseases specific to Black people. That's why they started the grocery giveaways, because of food insecurity in the communities. And so the thing that I always encourage people to understand is that lack of access to healthy, fresh, affordable food is just one indicator of how these communities are materially deprived. Most communities you go to where you can find a gun quicker than you can find an organic apple or a banana. These are the same communities that are dealing with crumbling infrastructure, underfunded, segregated public schools. Oftentimes, these are communities that have industries that are poisoning the air and the soil. So you have the environmental racism. And so we're just like fighting all these fronts. So I always encourage people to think about how we can bring more access to food, but we just need to think about how our communities have been under attack in multiple ways. But for me, food is just one of those things that everybody can latch on to. If you, like I said earlier, if you bring a good plate of food to the table, people will show up. And then that's a great way to start conversations about all these issues around equity and violence that our communities experience.
But with the lack of quality food and the lack of a balanced budget, a plate for a large group of people, you wonder why you get people who are moody, who are low on spiritual energy. They're dealing with other traumas as well: job trauma, imprisonment trauma, policing, separated families, what have you, crappy segregated housing. But then also, they don't feel good in their bodies because they don't have access to quality food. And this surely leads to, I have a shorter temper, a shorter trigger. So I'm going to start a fight, be it an argument or a physical fight, faster than other people who feel well nourished and they feel more even keeled, and they can think about, hey, let's de-escalate this because I don't feel stressed because I ate a quality meal today, yesterday, the day before, etc.
Yeah, it's deep. The moment, so while I was in grad school at NYU and looking at like radical movements of the 60s and 70s and learning more about the survival programs of the Black Panthers, there was
Robert
this
Kelly is my man. I know it's your man. Robert Kelly is my man.
the
No
genius.
doubt.
There was a moment where everything made sense for me. And I talk about this moment often where I was leaving my apartment in Bed-Stuy to go to the village to teach TA a class at NYU. And I look across the subway at like 7:30 in the morning and I see these kids, huddled up. And what were they doing? They were eating Red Hot Cheetos, white donuts, the powdery donuts, candy bars. They were drinking sodas and energy drinks and sugary juices. And I realized that while they
And
were
smoking a blunt.
I mean, it's Brooklyn.
Getting stoned before school, before 9th, 10th grade, I'm like, damn, like, can you do it after school and like relax after the end of the not to get stoned to go to school? Come on.
The subway stations were hot in Bed-Stuy at that time. But I was just like, yo, these kids are, as my mentor Raj Patel says, stuffed and starved. They're eating these edible food-like substances, but this is not what any person, but especially young people's whose minds and bodies are developing should have in the morning. They need nutrient-dense foods, not these empty calories. And that was really the catalyst for me to join the food justice movement, because when I think about many of the most powerful movements of the 20th century, whether it's the civil rights movement in the American South or the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, it was young people, like their brilliance, their bravery, though that's what kept these movements going. And I realized that for the food justice movement, we had to empower and train a generation of young people who would really be the leaders of this movement. Because for me, if we talk about transforming communities, I always say that we need to ensure that the people who are most impacted by these inequities, they should be the leaders. What do they need? They need resources. They need power shifted in their hands. They don't need snow-capped NGOs or the government telling them how they should fix it. Because if that was the case, it wouldn't be a problem. It wouldn't be a problem if these institutions actually had an investment in, whole healthy communities. So,
did you ever talk to KRS-One about how he changed your life?
Dude, can I tell you a funny story? I worship KRS-One. Like hearing Beef obviously was like this catalyst for me becoming a food justice activist. And when I say becoming a food justice activist, I mean being the most self-righteous, dogmatic, judgmental vegan that you could ever imagine in high school.
Tell them. But where's that story, right? If they don't know, right? You heard KRS-One's song Beef and decided to become a vegan.
So my boy brings over this tape because, we listened to tapes back in the 90s. And I hear Beef. What a relief. When will this poison cease? This is another public service announcement. You can believe it or you can doubt it. And that just changed everything for me. And look, I don't know, KRS, if you hear this, look, this is just a moment for me. But I was a bit judgmental when KRS-One came out with the Nike collaboration, and then they did the commercial. The revolution is basketball. You remember that commercial?
I do. Time when that rapper institution brand collaboration was like, whoa, you're selling out. Now we're like, who you collabing with? Who you do another thing with Adidas? That last collection was dope.
Yeah, we're in a different place. So I was kind of a little judgmental jerk. So for years, I was like, man, I'm mad at KRS-One.
He didn't even appear in the commercial. It was just a voiceover. And we were still like, you're selling out.
Right? Dude, let me tell you something. When I was at NYU, KRS-One came to perform and a friend dragged me to the concert. And I still was kind of like, I'm mad at KRS-One. KRS-One, as you know, is one of the most magnetic performers ever. Like when I saw him, I was like, you're forgiven. I absolve you of whatever like madness I had back when I was younger. I haven't gotten an opportunity to tell the teacher how much of an impact he's had on my life. I don't know if I'd be sitting in front of you today had I not heard Beef by KRS-One. So I would.
You heard it one time and said, I can't eat meat anymore. I gotta change my life.
No, I heard that song 60 times because once I played it, I could not stop. That was on repeat for like the rest of the day. So after the 60th time, yeah, I mean, it wasn't like it was a kind of like immediate shift. I like to say that's when the journey started. It wasn't linear. Like there were times I was trying to be a vegetarian and then a vegan, and then I studied abroad in France in like the late '90s. You couldn't be a vegan in France in the late '90s. So, but yeah, the teacher, Karis one.
Well, it's still hard to be vegan as far as I can see, outside of the coasts, right? I mean, my wife is vegan. I am absolutely not. But we go to different places, and I know she's like, it's less recently, but for a long time, she was like, these are your options for vegans. You have one thing on the menu for like a lot, New York, San Francisco, LA, Miami, DC. I'm sure like a lot of people are walking in the door like, I have some politically motivated, whatever, dietary restrictions. Are you thinking about me? Like, oh, you're not, and you get people like David Chang, amazing chef, who's basically like, fuck a vegan. I'm fucking and proud of it. Right. And like, as a carnivore, I'm like, yes, but I respect the vegans. But it's hard. It's hard.
I mean, look, I at one point was doing like 60, 70 public speaking engagements per year all over the country, little colleges and bumfuck who knows where. And yeah, I'd be starving sometimes. Like it'd be like, what's the vegan options? They like, oh, we got some French fries and a iceberg lettuce salad. But I will say, it's surprisingly, when I travel the country now, I go to these places that I'm just like, oh, there's no way they're going to have plant-based options. And it's like always some little health food store or some little mom and pop owned restaurant where they have, a robust selection of options. So I think a lot more people are just aware of the impact that having a plant-centered diet can have, not just on our health. I don't think a vegan diet is the perfect diet for anyone in terms of health reasons. I can make arguments all day in terms of the ethical reasons, the economic, and certainly the environmental reasons why we all should be vegans, period. Like, yeah, we all need to be vegans. But for health reasons, like, no, like there's no perfect diet for everyone. But I'm glad there's more an awareness where people are like, even restaurants that aren't necessarily vegan, they're like, yeah, we need to have some vegan options on here because there's so many people who are like, I want to eat differently so we can have a world for my children and grandchildren. So
I understand the politics, and in so many areas of my life, the politics shapes me. And when you come to the plate, I am so rudimentary. I keep coming back to that line, that John Travolta line from the end of Pulp Fiction. Bacon tastes good. Pork chops taste good. I can't fucking do. I'm not thinking about any of that politics shit when it comes to eating.
That's why, I'm not the guy to sit here and vilify the traditional ways that Black people have eaten because, look, I've had greens that have like pig or like fat back in them or, cooked in lard. That shit's good. I'm not going to pretend like it's not good just to be, like, oh, I'm performing veganism. But, I get why people would want to avoid things like that. But the thing that people need to understand that these are ways that people would eat to add flavor and nutrient density in a really quick way. So one of the biggest criticisms that I've heard over my own body of work is that, oh, I love Bryant's recipes, but they take 20 hours to make. And the reality is that when you're making plant-based food, when you aren't using animal products, you have to build the flavors. If you're trying to make food that's not like these Frankenburgers or all these processed packaged vegan items, if you're using real food, it takes time. It's slow cooking. Slow cooking isn't just like Carla Petrini in Italy. Like when my grandmother would be in the kitchen in Memphis, Tennessee, cooking all day on Saturday for supper on Sunday, that's slow food cooking. So I always tell people that we got to get out of this mindset that, this kind of capitalism convinces us that we have to do everything on our own. I'm like, sure, it may be a cost prohibitive for you to go to the farmer's market by yourself and get a lot of food. It may take a long time for you to make all those meals, but what if you got 5 of your friends? What if y'all pooled all your resources and you go to the Fort Greene Farmers Market and y'all collectively buy a lot of raw ingredients, and then you go over to Kwame's house, who has this amazing chef's kitchen and a Cuisinart and a Vitamix, and then y'all all make like 10 dishes that are from scratch using fresh ingredients. You can divvy them among the group. You have like fresh home cooked meals for the whole week, and you're building community with people that you care about. And so I think that's the cornerstone of really doing this well, is doing it in community with people and not feeling like we have to be in our little bubble doing it alone.
That is very Wakanda. I love that.
Very Wakanda.
Here we go, get together. I could be real. I could like a group of young men getting together and cooking all day long. They had to have some weed up in there. They'd be like, "What? Can we turn on the game? What is happening right now?"
A little green wouldn't hurt a day like that.
Oh my God! I mean, what is? Okay, so all the things that you've done, you're clearly thinking about Black people and Blackness a lot. And I ask everyone who comes on the show, what does being Black mean to you? And you are clearly wrapping your work in your love of Black people. So let's talk about that.
Being Black to me means honoring my ancestors and my elders. And I mean, my intellectual, my artists, my activists, ancestors and elders, as well as my blood, genetic ancestors and elders. I think about the people who have inspired me, from, the former Black Panther Party members to, Malcolm X to, brilliant visual artists like Romare Bearden, to novelists like Richard Wright and James Baldwin and Ralph Ellison. Like, all these people inspire me to just be my best self and like to contribute to Black culture, to Black, movement building. I grew up surrounded by Black culture. I don't know. So do you know that I come from a family of musicians? My uncle Don was the house songwriter for High Records, the famed soul music label in Memphis, and he wrote some of my aunt and Peebles' biggest hits, including "I Can't Stand the Rain," "Against My Young Pain." So just our family, it was always Black culture, Black music, like Blackness, and so I'm just committed to uplifting our people because that's how I was raised. I want to model that for my children. Like, I'm doing it for the people and for my ancestors, and I'm doing it for my children as well. Like, I want them to be committed to continuing to, we have to continue this fight. We see what's going on. We see what just happened with the AP board deciding that they're going to remove the books from some of our most brilliant thinkers, scholars, writers. Come on, this fight is continuing, and your and my children are going to have to be a part of, holding that torch up. So, we just continue marching on.
Hopefully they'll be sufficiently fed for the revolution.
No doubt, no doubt.
Thank you so much for your time and your energy and everything, and best of luck with this next chapter. It sounds extremely exciting, so God bless.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Look, I just want to say I've been a big fan for years, always been a big fan of your writing. You were one of my favorite hip hop journalists. And, even before I had a family, just seeing you around Fort Greene with your kids and just how much of a loving and present dad you were, that was a big inspiration for the way that I show up for my kids too. So it's truly an honor, my brother.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Hey, if you like what you saw today, be sure to check out more Touré Show content right here. Don't forget to click that subscribe button for more Touré Show content every week.